What bothers me most about the American Christmas experience is not Wham's Last Christmas playing over and over again on the radio. I actually rather like it. And it's not the endless, unchecked consumerism, because if I'm honest, I kind of like that too. And it's not even like the big, gaudy, like inflatable snowman that my neighbor has in his lawn, because secretly I kind of like that too. What bothers me most about the American Christmas experience is that no one seems to be disturbed by Christmas. Disturbed, that's not my word. It's straight out of the Gospels. That's the word that the Gospel writer Matthew uses to describe how, like, middle-class, suburbanite types, people who have something to lose, how they should experience Christmas, how they should feel about Christmas. That the news of the arrival of a new king implies the overthrow of an old kingdom. So if you're invested in this world, if you're doing all right for yourself, if you're trusting in your education, your wealth, your career, the economy, your political party, the stock market, whatever, then the last thing you want to hear is that it's all going to be overthrown. It's kind of disturbing. And yet, in America 2023, we proclaim, joy to the world, the Lord has come, and nobody seems to be disturbed. Nobody. Which is to say that the message of Christmas seems to have been lost. So listen, I'm not that guy. I'm a pastor, but I'm not that guy. I'm not like the guy who has to say Merry Christmas in all caps every time I say Christmas. Like, I'm not against the American Christmas traditions. I'm not. So Frosty the Snowman is just a magical snowman who came to life one day, and I'm okay with that. Your Christmas tree is more likely has to do with like ancient druid pagan worship than it does Jesus, and I'm okay with that. Have your pagan trees. We got some up on stage. And as a pastor, like, people ask me all the time, like, how do you talk to your kids about Santa Claus? And I just tell my kids the truth. St. Nicholas is a 3rd century saint from Myra who gave gifts, reportedly did miracles, and when he met Arius, the famous heretic who denied the full deity of Jesus Christ, he slapped him full in the face. That's what he's most famous. There's a picture memorializing it. Jolly old St. Nick himself. Which, of course, brings whole new meaning to you better be good for goodness sake. So I'm not trying to super spiritualize things. I'm not. I'm okay. You have your Christmas traditions. It's great. I'm just making an observation that Christmas in America has become increasingly meaningless. That somehow we've ended up in this place where our world is suddenly littered, filled with all the symbols of deity, God with us, all the symbols of a new kingdom, all the symbols that this world is about to be overthrown, the lights and the trees, the stars, the festive foods, the sacred meal, all of it. We have all the symbols, but they've been emptied of any meaning. They don't mean what they're supposed to mean, what they used to mean. They're not just meaningless, it's worse than meaningless, because meaningless is one thing. These have actually been co-opted. They've been memed. You know what a meme is, right? Where you take like a photo out of its rip it out of its original context, and then you make it say whatever you want it to say. Usually mocking, usually funny. So this is one of the most famous memes of all time, right? They put these two pictures together. I don't even know what they have to do with, but a woman yelling and a cat. I don't even know where they come from. Some of you might. I'm not that culturally savvy. But then you take that, and then you make it about pineapple belongs on pizza. No! And then you take it, and then you put it on a Christmas sweater. And then you take it and you put it on your pillows, and then it just descends into absurdity. This one's my favorite right here. What do you do with that? Okay, which brings me to this. This, of course, is the Nativity. Joseph and Mary worship before our newborn king. And this is a scene that should rend our hearts, that should say something, that should disturb us too, that should speak into our culture. But a few years back, I saw this meme, and I just couldn't unsee it. They took this and they said, this is not the nativity, this is an epic battle scene. It's two bloodthirsty T-Rex fighting to the death in front of a running saw blade. Can you see it here? If you just add a little creativity. Like, you can't unsee that. In fact, look at that. Rah! A couple of people in my neighborhood have this, and I'm like, it's clearly that. It's two T-Rex. In fact, today you can now buy Christmas ornaments that say Merry T-Rexmas. Yeah. So this is what's happened to Christmas. It's devolved into absurdity. So the symbols of God, they're everywhere. The signs of a coming kingdom, they're everywhere for everyone to see. The markers that this world as we know it is going to be overthrown. They're all around us, and yet instead of being disturbed, we laugh, we mock. We make the very symbols that mark the destruction of this world into symbols of consumerism, greed, symbols of this world itself. It's absurd. Man, oh man. Never is this more obvious and more uncomfortable than the most wonderful time of the year. When we are endlessly consuming, numbing ourselves, and it is a merry T-Rexmas to all, and to all a good night. So if we're going to hear the Christmas story as good news of great joy, Matthew and the early gospel writers, they think that it needs to first disturb us. And that's precisely what Matthew intends to do. So Matthew is he's one of the earliest biographers of Jesus. He was an eyewitness, one of the original 12. He was actually a tax collector, which makes me love him even more. He was an outsider, an outcast of society. Jesus said, I want you to be one of my followers. He saved him out of that and then made him one of his followers. And then Matthew tells us this story. Matthew, he just doesn't see things the way we see them. So if you're looking for a guide to help you find God in history, in this life we're living right here, in a godless world, if you're looking for a guide to help you in the dark moments when it feels like there is no God, if you're looking for a guide to help you find God in your life, you can hardly do better than Matthew. He will disturb us until we can finally hear the good news. So today we're in Matthew chapter 2. And he has a story for us. It's a Christmas story. You probably know it, or at least parts of it. But it starts out like this. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, you probably know that part. During the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw a star in the east and have come to worship him." So at this point, we feel like, I know that story. We all basically know this story. These are the story of the Magi, we three kings, the wise men, right? We have pictures of this. They show up in our nativity. We know these guys. We sing songs about them. Now, if you ask me, who exactly are the Magi? My answer would be, I don't know. I mean, could they possibly be Zoroastrian prophets who received the prophecy of a rising star from Numbers chapter 24 through the ancient Jews who remained in Babylon? Maybe. Could be. But here's the deal. Matthew doesn't seem to think it's important enough to add those details. But there is one detail that Matthew thinks is worth dwelling on. And it's that Jesus was born during the time of King Herod. So I want to put this in perspective. Of the first 30 years of Jesus' life, 30 years, all leading up to when he began his ministry proper, we have 3 chapters. In all 4 Gospels, we have 3 chapters about those first 30 years. And of those 3 chapters, one entire chapter is dedicated to, is surrounded by, is built upon this one man, Herod the Great. One man dominates 1 out of 3 chapters of Jesus' early life is about Herod the Great. It's as if Matthew is saying, hey, you need to pay attention to this. Like, if you want to see what God is up to in the Christmas story, if you want to know who Jesus is and what it means that, behold, your king has come, then you need to pay attention to this man. If you want to understand what God's doing in a godless world, you need to meet this evil, pompous, prideful, godless man who shaped an entire generation. You need to know Herod the Great. So Herod, he was an Edomite, which is a descendant from Esau as opposed to Jacob. We know that he was a great politician, had extremely powerful friends. Think Cleopatra, Mark Antony. And he was stunningly brilliant, and he had an ego that makes Donald Trump appear humble. Yeah. So after 44 BC, Julius Caesar is stabbed to death, by his own friends. E tu, Brute! And then right after that moment, there's a power vacuum, and the genius, Herod the Great, sees his opportunity. So what's he do? He goes in and calls in a few favor, twists a few arms, kills a few people, and managed to get the Roman Senate to name him prefect of Palestine. He's going to be in charge. And then he takes now this new title and gathers a whole army, and then he goes in 37 BC, goes to Palestine itself, shows up in Jerusalem with this vast Roman army, and he says, "Behold, your king has arrived! Joy to the world!" Except the Jews, they were not too excited about it. Because to him, he looked a lot like Roman oppression, actually. And two, he himself was an Edomite. And so it didn't make sense. Why would this Edomite rule over the Jews? He's a foreign oppressor. And so Herod did what any good king would do, and when people don't feel warm and fuzzy about him, he just killed everyone who disagreed with him. Tens of thousands of people. He just slaughtered everyone who grumbled. And then he proceeded to send assassins out into the countryside, and anyone he found who weren't willing to bow the knee to Herod, he had them crucified. So the Roman Senate, they heard this news, and they were so excited that Herod's finally found a way to tame these Jewish people that they then proceeded to declare Herod king of the Jews. They were so happy. Finally, we found a man who could bring peace to the Middle East. Even back then, that was a problem. So Herod is declared king of the Jews, and the only problem with that, of course, is, the Bible. You see, for 1,000 years, the Jews have been waiting for God's promised king, who would be a son of David, not an Edomite. So you see, Herod, he did not meet even the most basic qualifications. He wasn't even fully Jewish, much less a son of David. So for most of us, we would hear this and be like, oh man, I guess I'm disqualified. That's insurmountable. But for Herod, that was just a road bump. It's okay. I got this. So he went in and he had the genealogical records, the library, burnt to the ground, and then rewrote his own genealogy and wrote himself in. He is now a son of David. Isn't that great? I'm your Messiah. See, I have proof now. Now this, as ridiculous as this might seem, you have to appreciate the sheer audacity of this man's ego. Here's a man who literally thinks he can rewrite history and make himself into Messiah. He thinks he can rewrite history and make himself into Messiah. So to this Herod come these mysterious magi from the east, and they ask, where's the one who's born king of the Jews? We saw a star in the east and have come to worship him. And then we read verse 3. When Herod heard this, he was disturbed. That's the word. And all Jerusalem with him. Herod's disturbed. He doesn't like the sound of this. I thought I was king of the Jews. But all of Jerusalem is disturbed too. So you have to appreciate kind of the love-hate relationship that the people had with Herod at the time. So on the one hand, Herod was a genius. He was an evil genius, but he was a genius. This man could get things done. This man he promised to make Israel great again, and then he did it. He undertook building campaigns, the likes of which the Jews had not seen since the time of King Solomon, 1,000 years prior. He rebuilt the Jewish temple to glorious proportions, covered it in gold, so that it became one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. He brought peace to the Middle East for 40 years, something that, as we know, is extremely hard to do. So I'm not sure that anyone actually loved Herod, but if you lived in Jerusalem, your security, your wealth, your future, it was wrapped up with him. He made you wealthy. He made you proud to be a Jew again. So a threat against his kingdom threatened your kingdom too. A threat against his future threatened your future. So on the one hand, they kind of didn't want to see his kingdom overturned. On the other hand, he was a horrible human being. So he was known for executing anyone who got in his way. At the time, the Jewish people were ruled by the Sanhedrin, and it is said by Josephus, the ancient historian, that 7 out of every 8 members of the Sanhedrin ended up being executed by Herod at some point during his reign. 7 out of 8. When he would go away on his trips, he told his chief officer, "If I don't come back, I want you to kill my wife." He couldn't imagine her with anyone else, so just kill her. At one point, he became suspicious that she was plotting against him, so he had her killed anyways. He took the position of the great high priest, that one great position, the man who represents God and man before us all and enters into the Holy of Holies once a year. He took that position and he sold it to his brother-in-law. But his brother-in-law, it turns out, was a hottie and popular with the people. I'm not making this stuff up. You got to read it. Josephus. It's like a soap opera. He's the, Zac Efron of high priests. And all the young women loved him. And Herod became jealous, so there was a little accident, and he ended up drowning. How did that happen? And we know the spot where he was drowned. It's a 2-foot pool of water. His sons, when he was getting aged, his sons started vying for succession, so he had his 3 eldest sons executed. At one point, Caesar Augustus is reported to have said, "It's better to be Herod's pig than his son. You have a better chance of living a happy life." So when Jerusalem hears that there's a new threat to Herod's throne, people are terrified. Terrified at what they might lose, terrified at what he might do. And so everyone's wondering, what is Herod going to do? And the answer is, he's going to have a Bible study. Watch this. When he called together the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born, the Christ or Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." And then they pull out this 700-year-old prophecy of Micah that reads like this: "But you, Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." So why, when his kingdom is threatened to be overthrown by a new king, why would Herod want to do a Bible study? That's the question. There's a story about Mark Twain. Mark Twain, I don't know if you know, but he was a famous unbeliever. He regularly mocked Christianity and what Christians believed. But late in life, he got ill, and someone walked into his room and walked in on him, and he was reading the Bible. And they're like, "What's going on here? Why are you, of all people, reading the Bible?" And his answer, famous for his quips, was, "I'm looking for loopholes." That appears to be what Herod's doing right here. He's looking for loopholes. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may worship him." Wink, wink. Now, if you know the story, you know that the Magi do indeed find the Christ, find Jesus, but they never do make it back to Herod, and this does not sit well with the man. And so at this point, he's done having Bible studies, and we read in verse 13, "When the Magi had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. 'Get up,' he said, 'take the child and mother, escape to Egypt, stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him.'" You see, Herod, he wants to solve this problem just like he solved every other problem in his life, by killing people. So he, Joseph, got up, took the child and his mother during the night, left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. So let's reflect. Let's hear this Christmas story, right? If you were to ask Herod at this moment, "Herod, what are you doing?" he would say, I'm going to kill this boy who's challenging my kingdom. This boy king, I'm going to kill this boy. And if you ask Joseph, why? Why, Joseph? Why are you running? What are you doing? Why are you running to Egypt? He would say, well, there's this madman, Herod, and he wants to kill my son. I got to run. But if you were to ask Matthew, why? Why is this happening right now, Matthew? He replies like this. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. So why is Herod plotting this? Why is Joseph leading his family to Egypt? He said, because 700 years before this day, God declared through the prophet Hosea that this must happen. That's why. That God declared that the inauguration of his king, his son, would begin when God called him out of Egypt the same way he had called the Israelites out of Egypt in the Exodus. That just as many, many years before, 1,500 years prior to this, God had saved his people through something we call the Exodus, pulled them out of slavery. God would once again save his people with a new Exodus here. You see, according to God's own plans, he needed Jesus to go down to Egypt to set the stage for his inauguration. So how does God make this happen? He lets Herod be Herod. That's it. He lets Herod go crazy. He lets Herod's hatred spew over. That's how he'll fulfill his prophecy. So do you get the irony here? Herod's plot to kill Jesus is actually God's plot to fulfill prophecy. Herod's declaration, Jesus must die, sets up God's declaration of hope for all mankind. Herod's plan to stop the ancient prophecies actually fulfills the ancient prophecies. Herod is doing all that he can to free himself from God, when in fact he is doing everything in service to God. Do you hear it? But it gets better. Watch this. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Like, he's furious. So he spits in God's face. No prophecy can stop me. I am Herod the Great. So he orders this atrocity, the massacre of children, infants, babies, all of them, slaughtered. Famously called the slaughter of the innocents. So if you were to ask Herod that day, Herod, what have you done? Say, I fought against God. I killed him. If you were to ask the people who were there that day, the people of Bethlehem, what has Herod done? Well, if you've seen anyone bury their child, then you know. Some things are too terrible for words. But if you ask Matthew, what has Herod done? He says this. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. And he starts to sing. He starts to sing. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. He's singing a line from a song that the Jews who went to the synagogue week after week would have sung over and over and over again. It was part of the regular liturgy, similar to me singing a line from Amazing Grace, how sweet. Immediately you recognize it. You know the context. This was not just any lyric. This was straight out of Jeremiah chapter 31, one of the most popular songs of the synagogue of the day. And every synagogue attending Jew would know that this line is part of a much bigger musical vision that Jeremiah has. So the song, it starts out slow. Jeremiah looks out and he sees this pathetic mass of people, the lame, the blind, women in labor. They are desperate and helpless. And they're dragging through the desert, weeping and praying as they go. But then God pronounces a blessing over this crowd of people. And suddenly, the dry stream beds begin to fill with water, and the desert begins to blossom, burst into new life. And then they hear God say, I'm bringing you home. And one young girl starts to dance, and then another, and then another. And then it says that the young men start laughing, and the old men too. And over this scene of these people who were once weeping, they're now cheering and celebrating. God declares, I will turn their mourning into gladness. I will give comfort and joy instead of sorrow. And then just as this song burst into celebration, it cuts to this one line of great sorrow in this song. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Because Rachel, the wife of the patriarch Jacob, she is pictured as the mother of God's people, and she is weeping for her lost children. So this line that Matthew quotes, it's because the mothers of Bethlehem lost their children, right? Well, sure, yeah, that's why he quotes it. But Matthew knew, just like every good synagogue-attending Jew, that this is the only sad line in a song of celebration. It's the only sad line in a song of hope. In fact, the very next line reads, restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears. Stop crying, for your work will be rewarded, declares the Lord. There is hope for the future, declares the Lord. Your children will return to your own land. There will be a new exodus. I'm bringing you home. And so the vision that Jeremiah saw of desperate people from all over the earth flocking to Israel, this is the promise of what will happen someday. People from every tribe and tongue, and a desperate, helpless people will come flocking, and they will find joy as they come towards God. In fact, there will be so many people coming along that they'll have to set up road signs across the desert and the wilderness to bring them home. That we'll need to send someone out into the wilderness to point the way, to prepare the way of the Lord. And the sign, the marker, that this is about to take place, that the new Exodus, that this moment of joy and hope is about to take place. The sign of this is the great sorrow of mothers weeping over their children. So when Matthew sings, a voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, he says, this is it. This terrible incident is the moment we've been waiting for 600 years. These tears are the tears we've been waiting for. This is it. Broken and hurting people from every tribe and tongue and nation, they're going to start coming home to God. This is the marker of God's kingdom, that God is actually with us. And do you see what Herod has done here? His plot to stop Jesus from becoming king becomes the very means by which God prepares the way. He works so hard to make himself king, but he ends up instead becoming God's pawn. He works so hard to remove God from our world and ends up serving God's purposes. He tries to destroy Christ and only ends up destroying himself. Do you hear it? So after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. He said, get up, take the children and his mother and go to the land of Israel. For those who are trying to take the child's life are dead. So the ancient Jewish historian Josephus describes Herod's condition at his death, and I quote, he was driven mad with paranoia and depression and fits of rage. His body convulsed and shook violently. Parts of his body began to putrefy, and maggots were seen in his flesh. The smell of his breath and the rotting body was so bad that his servants were in danger of fainting. And in this horrific condition, facing death itself, he still refused to repent. He was still plotting on how to make himself immortal. And so his last command as king was that I want all the officials in the region to be imprisoned, so that at the moment I die, I want them executed so that there will be weeping across the land. By God's grace, the moment he died, his last order was overturned, and that never came to pass. So he, Joseph, got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. With Herod's death, it begins. Starting with Jesus, streams of desperate people will begin coming to God in a new exodus. People from every tribe and tongue and nation. It's begun. The salvation of God has begun. This world's beginning to be overturned. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So Archelaus now takes the place of his father. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets. He will be called a Nazarene. Do you get it? So Herod's story closes out with his son Archelaus, his godless son, taking the place of his father, serving as a puppet to do God's will. So what's this story about? If you asked a historian, what is this story about? They would say, well, it's about a megalomaniac leader. It's about brutal policies and politics. If you had news networks at the time and said, hey, what's the title that you're going to put, the headline? What's this story about? They would say, mass killing of children in Bethlehem. That's what the story would be about. If you ask NGOs, like, what's this story about? It's a refugee crisis. I mean, people are fleeing their country looking for asylum from an insane tyrant. And all of this is true and oddly contemporary. But what's missing from all these answers is God. If we ask Matthew, what's this story about? Matthew sees the same stuff we see, this megalomaniac, the atrocity, the refugee crisis. He sees the same evil, the same struggles, the same doubts, the same grief, the same fear, the same tears we're weeping. He sees everything we see, but Matthew sees something else. He also sees the work of God. He also sees a coming kingdom that is overturning the kingdoms of this world. That in Herod's reign of terror, he sees God at work at the darkest moments, at the death of children. He sees God hasn't abandoned us. That in the very place where it feels like God is nowhere to be found, he sees God preparing his greatest work yet. He sees a God who is with us in our fears, in our doubts, in our grief, in the times when we feel completely alone and abandoned. He sees a story that is disturbing. A story that will disturb us to the core, so long as our hope is in this world, so long as your hope is in your wealth, so long as your hope is in your political party or in your health or even your family. If you put your hope in this world, this is a disturbing message indeed. But to those who've given up, who've let go of hoping in this world and placed their hope in Christ alone, and him as King, well, this is good news of great joy. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Father, I pray that we will be disturbed by this message, by all the ways that we cling to the things of this world and we love the things of this world and we trust in the powers of this world, Lord. I pray that it will be haunting to us so that we repent of that, so that we let go of that and place our trust in your King alone. Finding joy that this world does not know and cannot take. God, I pray for those who are broken and hurting and weeping right now, that they will hear the good news of great joy being proclaimed over them, that you are calling them to yourself, and that you are launching a new kingdom that this world knows nothing about. And pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.